Morning all, Brian S. Pratt here. Hope everyone's having a good morning. Going to read chapter 28 of Shepherd's Quest, book 1 of the Broken Key Trilogy with commentary and spoilers. But we're at chapter 28, only one more to go and then we're done with the book. So, a recap, Riyan and crew has found a second segment of the key, have escaped the ruins of Algoth, and now they're trying to get out of Goblin territory. They need to reach the haven of the marketplace, which is on the human side of the boundary between Goblin and human lands. Once there, they're home free. But to get there, they're on foot in Goblin territory. There's a raging fire between them and the marketplace. So they got to figure out a way to get there. Well, they know that they're on the edge of this small lake, and there's a river that goes to a big lake, and then they get to the marketplace. So they got to get down there, and they have a plan that Riyan and Bart are going to sneak over to the Goblin village, which is on the other side of the small lake, steal a boat, pick up the other two, and then head down the river. So we'll see how well that go. Once they reach the lake shore, Riyan and Bart removed their packs and left them with Chad and Kevik. Bart did put his lockpicks within his shirt. Riyan eyed him questioningly about that. "My picks go where I go," was the only answer he gave before they headed out. Working their way around the lake to the edge of the Goblin village, they stood behind the bole of a large tree and scanned the area. The buildings were similar in size and design to the ones Bart had seen in the settlement they came across on their way to Algoth. The whole place looked peaceful, with only a small portion of the windows having light. "Looks like almost everyone is asleep," Riyan whispered. Bart nodded. Then he pointed into the village toward the water's edge. In the moonlight, they saw a dock to which a dozen or so boats were moored. "Come on," he said, "and be silent." Riyan followed as Bart moved quickly to the side of the nearest building. Its windows were dark. Then, after a brief pause to ensure they remained undetected, they repeated their dash to the next building. From building to building, they continued moving quickly, drawing ever closer to the dock and the boats secured there. Suddenly, Bart placed an arm across Ryan's chest and pressed him to the side of the building. A split second later, two Goblin men emerged from the side of the building and made their way toward the dock. They talked to each other in their guttural language. One held a large net, and the other two carried small boxes. From the looks of them, Ryan figured they were fishermen headed out for an early morning catch. Bart and Riyan remained motionless against the building as the two goblins reached the dock and removed the mooring lines from one of the boats. Other sounds began coming to them as the village started to stir. Lights appeared in more of the windows. The village was waking up. "We can't stay here," Riyan whispered earnestly in fear. "Quiet," replied Bart. The two fishermen had finished... No, the three fishermen. Because one held nets, two held boxes. The three fishermen had finished releasing the mooring lines and were beginning to head out. "Come on," Bart said. Moving quickly, he practically ran in the dark toward the dock. Riyan followed. All around them, they heard goblins speaking to one another within their homes. Terror at being caught almost immobilized Riyan, but he somehow kept going. They hit the dock, and Bart immediately went all the way down to the small four-seater moored at the end. "Hurry, Riyan," he whispered to him as he reached the boat and started untying the lines. Riyan quickly raced down to the end of the dock and made his way into the boat. He glanced back at the village and could see goblins moving about. None were headed their way at the moment. Then the rope that had moored the boat to the dock was tossed inside, followed quickly by Bart. Riyan held one of the oars in his hand that had been lying in the bottom and handed the other to Bart. Working together, they paddled the boat quickly out onto the lake. Riyan kept glancing back to the village, but so far, none of the goblins had yet discovered the theft. He sighed in relief, and his fear began subsiding as the distance between them and the dock grew. To the east, the sky was beginning to lighten with the coming of dawn. They needed to find Kevik and Chad quickly before it grew light enough for the goblins to see them out on the lake. They rowed for another quarter hour as they searched the shoreline for the other two. The fishermen they had seen earlier must have gone to a different location to fish, as they hadn't encountered them. Finally, they saw the pair on the shoreline waving to them. They paddled harder, and when they reached the shore, ran the prow of the boat up onto the beach. "I started worrying that something had happened to you," Chad said as he threw the packs into the boat. "We need to hurry," Ryan said, gesturing to the village. He added, They're beginning to awaken." With the packs now in the bottom of the boat, Kevik hopped in, and then Chad pushed them off the shore. As Chad jumped in, Ryan and Bart used the oars to turn the boat around and headed toward the mouth of the river leading to the larger lake by the marketplace. The sky continued to lighten as they rowed across the lake. The mountain tops of the range separating the two lands became more distinct, and the darkness around the four comrades in the boat began to diminish. Also visible was a dark plume of smoke rising some distance away between them and the mountains. Obviously, the fire still continued to rage. "Look," said Kevin, and they turned to see several other boats out on the water. Goblins were throwing out nets and drawing them back as they gathered in the fish. "Doesn't look like they're searching for a missing boat," Ryan observed. "No, it doesn't," replied Bart. "It may not even occur to them that it was stolen by humans. After all, how often do humans make it this far?" "I hope you're right," said Chad. They continued rowing hard for the mouth of the river. They continued rowing hard until the mouth of the river appeared out of the early morning gloom. They rowed for it with all speed. As the boat entered the river, Ryan glanced back one last time to see if any pursuit had developed. He was greatly relieved to find that none had. While the sky continued to brighten, they rowed. They kept on the lookout for a place to hole up through the day, as they didn't dare risk being on the river during the daylight hours. When the sun was near to rising, they beached the boat and carried it inland to hide among the trees. The boat was fairly heavy, but they managed to lift it and carry it into the trees so as not to leave a telltale drag mark on the shoreline. They carried it 100 feet into the forest before setting it back to the ground. Exhausted and hungry, they settled down to wait for the coming of night, when they would return to the river and make their way to the large lake before the following morning. "Ryan," Bart said, "why don't you use your sling and find us something to eat?" "I really don't want raw meat," Ryan said. "I'd rather go hungry another day." With the smoke in the air from the fire downstream, I doubt if anyone is going to notice if we have a fire, Bart argued. Ryan knew everyone was hungry, with not but a few strips of meat a day or so ago to sustain them. "Very well," he said, and took his sling. Picking up a couple stones, he soon disappeared into the trees. By the time he returned with 2 rabbits, the others had a fire going. They built it close to the side of the boat in order to hide it in the event goblins passed by. But given the relative wildness of the surrounding trees and brush, it was unlikely the goblins often traveled through this area. The meal of roast rabbit was one of the best Ryan had ever had in his life. His mother always said hunger was the best seasoning, and she was right. Well, my grandmother always said that. It's funny how the little things that they said when you grew up work their way back into your life after they're gone. And it's true. All my books are riddled with little snippets of past of my past. Especially the Morsite saga. That one there is just, well, James is essentially me. You know, I based him on myself so I could keep him constant and consistent throughout the series. And so yeah, so all of James's anecdotes are mine. Once the meal was over, they turned in. Ryan took the first watch as the others began resting. He kept an ever-vigilant eye out for possible goblin incursions near the camp. But what was on his mind mostly was the fire. Smoke rose high into the sky before the upper air currents began pushing it eastward. What little breeze there was blew toward the fire. So hopefully, it would keep it moving away from them. But whether it did or not made no difference come morning, for they had little choice but to ride the river south, directly into the flames. Ryan wished they didn't have to go near the fire, but to circumvent it would mean setting out on foot. Days would be added before reaching the marketplace, and every extra day on this side of the mountains increased their chances of being spotted. Throughout the day, as the others took their turns at watch, they too couldn't help but watch the smoke rising. One shift at watch led to the next until darkness came again, and they deemed the time was right to go. Bart went to scout the area by the river, and once he made sure it was clear, returned to help bring the boat back to the water. The mood in the boat was somber as it began floating down the river. Each kept his thoughts to himself as the river brought them ever closer to the raging fire. It didn't take long before smoke had a stronger presence in the air. The farther they went, the thicker it became. Then from up ahead, they saw the glow from the fire. I don't know if you guys remember, Americans my age anyway, but Yellowstone burned down back in the 80s. I remember because my brother, his wife back then, and me, we went there for a week, and as we left, we could see smoke off in the distance, and that smoke is the one that burnt almost the whole park down. And I watched a documentary on it, the burning of Yellowstone and the fighting of the fire. That was really a fascinating documentary, and that had a great influence on how I wrote this segment that's coming up. Large sections of the forest burned off a ways from the river on both sides. Smoldering areas adjacent to the river grew more frequent, and in the moonlight they could see burnt, smoking husks that had at one time been tall, majestic trees. Ash started to rain down on them as it settled back to earth, and the heat from the fire became noticeable. Then all of a sudden, the boat came to a jarring stop as it ran aground. They were knocked off their seats from the unexpected impact. "What happened?" asked Ryan as he got himself off the bottom of the boat. "We ran into something," replied Bart. As it turned out, they had run aground at the spot where they had forded the river on their way in. They could make out the roads moving from the river on both sides. "Everyone out," Bart said. "We have to pull the boat across the ford to deeper water." They climbed out and positioned themselves around the boat. They pulled it across the ford. When the boat once again flowed freely, they hopped back in and continued on. Well, I've often thought that doesn't seem possible that it would run aground, but it's the summertime, dry season, so yeah, it's possible, and the river really widens at that spot. That's why there's a ford there, and I don't think that river is a really hotbed of commerce for the goblins. Smoke thickened. Ash rained down on them constantly, and the temperature had started to climb. Some of the pieces of ash coming down still glowed red. Even full-blown embers began dropping out of the sky. Ryan wondered about that until a tree next to the river suddenly popped. Embers flew in all directions, and they saw that the interior of the tree glowed red. Even though the fire had already swept through the area, some of the trees still smoldered on the inside, and that was from the documentary too, because trees, smoldered up, they would pop open. Not often, but it's rare. But I thought, I'll throw it in here. Embers flew in all directions, and they saw that glowed red. Right. Even though the fire had already swept through this area, some of the trees still smoldered on the inside. "Kevik," Bart broke the silence as he said, "we need some light." "But they'll see us," argued Chad. "We'll announce our presence," Ryan warned. "Look, the smoke has all but obscured the moon's light," he explained. "We can't see where we're going. Besides, if there are any goblins in the area, they'll either be going to fight the fire or moving away from it in flight." "Very well, Kevik," replied Kevik. His bobbing oar appeared and danced above the boat. "Thank you," said Bart. Kevik just nodded in reply. With the light, they could now better see the destruction left by the fire. Trees broken and smoldering, The ground a charred mass, and the ash rained down deceptively like snowflakes. And the ash rained down like snowflakes. Farther along, they came across small animals, or rather what was left of them, that had sought refuge by the water. Some looked for all the world as if they had simply fallen asleep. Others had their fur singed off, and in some cases still smoldered. "Oh, man," Chad said. Ryan turned his gaze from the dead animals and glanced at Chad. He saw that he was looking ahead of them in fear. Ryan turned his gaze downriver and saw the fire arcing to the sky. To either side of the river, the forest burned. The river looked like it was going to pass through the fires of hell, which wasn't very far from the truth. When Bart turned and saw the inferno they were fast approaching, he immediately grabbed an oar and said, "Ryan, help me bring us to the shore." Ryan grabbed the other oar and paddled hard. The boat turned and angled toward the riverbank. Are we going the rest of the way on foot?" he asked. "No," Bart replied. "I was thinking we could soak our clothes and fill the bottom with water." "That won't do any good," countered Kevik. "Not with what we're about ready to go through." "What would you suggest?" Bart asked. He again glanced at the inferno that began a little over a mile away. "Turn the boat over," he said. When the others looked at him, he explained, "Turn the boat over and use it as a cover." Reaching down, he grabbed the edge of the seat. "We can hold on to the seats to keep our heads above water." "Then we allow the river to carry us through." Chad nodded. "That might work better than just soaking our clothes." Bart grinned. I like it too. Let's do it." Paddling hard, he and Ryan soon had the boat grounded on the riverbank. They stepped out of the boat and put their packs on. Then they all moved to one side of the boat and, as one, lifted the edge until it tipped over. Ryan and Bart then each took the oars and carried them as all four dragged the boat back to the water. When they had it out far enough that they could duck under the surface and get inside, Bart and Kevik went first when Ryan and Chad held the boat steady. "I hope we survive this," commented Chad. "We will," Ryan assured him. "This idea of Kevik's is pretty good." A knocking came to them from inside of the boat, telling them Bart and Kevik were set. The two friends then ducked under the water and came up under the overturned boat. "Grab on," Bart said as they broke the surface. Inside, they found the bobbing sphere doing its annoying dance. Ryan laid the oar he brought with him on top of the upside-down seat and then grabbed on. The water wasn't so deep that their feet couldn't touch, so they began walking the boat out to deeper water. It didn't take long before they were floating free, and the current was taking them toward the inferno. "You can get rid of the light now," Chad said. A second later, the orb disappeared. Chad really hates that light. Beneath the boat, it was dark as they continued to float blind down the river. Then the water around them began to glow as they drew ever closer to the fire. Soon, the glow coming through the water was bright enough to allow them to see each other vaguely. "We're within the fire," stated Chad. Indeed, the water grew warm as the fire consuming the nearby trees heated it. The air within the boat grew warmer by the minute as well. Then, falling to degree, pattered against the topside like rain on a tin roof. "We never would have made it through the fire if we were still sitting exposed in the boat out there," Ryan said. "Doesn't look like it," Kevik agreed. Suddenly, from the other side of the bottom of the boat, they heard pounding. It wasn't the sound of debris falling. Rather, it sounded like the rhythmic banging a panicked person would do. "Someone's out there!" Ryan exclaimed. Fear of goblins again surged within him. Then he saw the light coming through the water near him become occluded as the lower half of a body was seen right next to the boat. It was unmistakably that of a goblin. "We can't leave it out there to burn," Chad said. From the intensity of the glow coming through the water, it was clear the temperature from the flames had to be extremely hot. Then it grew quiet as the pounding ceased. Ryan watched the shadow of the body as it began to sag into the river. The need to help someone in danger somehow overcame his fear. He reached under the side of the boat and grabbed hold of it. When he pulled it beneath the boat with him, they discovered it was a young male goblin. One side of his face was scarred pretty badly with burns, and it laid unconscious in Ryan's grasp. The skin of the goblin was tougher than that of a human. To Ryan, it felt akin to that of a reptile. "Keep its head above water," Bart said as he moved closer to assist Ryan. Together, they managed to hold onto the goblin lad as they continued down the river. "Is he alive?" asked Kevin. "Yes," replied Ryan. He gazed at the face of the goblin youth and wondered just how old it was. It couldn't be too young, as its size was approximately 2/3 that of an adult. "What are we going to do with it?" asked Kevin. Bart turned to him and said, "Once we're safely past the fire and near the goblin settlement on the shore of the larger lake, we'll drop it off." Ryan nodded. "They'll find him and take care of him." He and Bart continued supporting the goblin youth as they drifted deeper into the inferno raging on the other side of the boat. The glow in the water by this time had intensified from an off orange to a brighter white. Curious, Ryan touched the top of the boat and drew his hand back quickly. "Hot?" asked Bart with a grin. "Very," he replied. "What do we do if the bottom of the boat catches fire?" "If we're lucky, we'll never find out," said Chad. They continued floating for some time as they worked their way through the burning inferno. The temperature within the boat continued to rise. Already it was approaching an uncomfortable level. The goblin youth, other than a few grunts now and then, remained still and quiet. Wham! They were startled as something slammed into the bottom of the boat. It didn't inhibit their progress any, but it did scare them pretty good. "A falling limb, perhaps?" guessed Chekhovik. "Would think so," replied Ryan. "If it had been a tree, the boat would have shattered or been pressed to the bottom of the river." Still, they floated on. From time to time, their feet would touch the river bottom. When that happened, they would try to move the boat back to the center of the river where the water was deeper. In some cases, it was due to the fact that the river widened and thus the water level had dropped. During those times, they feared running into another fording area where the depth of the river was diminished. They didn't relish the idea of having to leave the protection of the boat in order to carry it across. For the water outside the boat still glowed from the light of the fire, though it was no longer the white-hot light. The reddish glow gave them hope that they had passed through the worst of it. Ryan didn't worry too much about the eventuality of having to carry the boat over a ford. After all, rivers tended to grow in size the farther they went, not diminish. It was during one of those times when they couldn't touch the bottom that he began to notice a red glow coming from the bottom of the boat above his head. "The boat's on fire!" he yelled in a panic. "What do we do?" Chad asked. Ryan started splashing water on the glow in an attempt to inhibit the burning process. Some of the water hit the face of the goblin youth, and it started to stir. Bart stuck his hand under the side of the boat and moved it to the outside surface. When his hand broke the water, the air felt hot, but not lethally so. "Move us to the side of the river," he told the others. "We may be able to put it out." Kicking hard, they worked their way to one side until they felt the river bottom under their feet. Hold it here," he said. "I'm going to check it out." Without waiting for the others to reply, Bart ducked under the water and moved out from the boat. He stayed underneath the water as he looked up to see how bad the fire around them was. The banks of the river couldn't be seen, but the glow of fire was all around him. He took but a moment to gauge the best location to break the surface. Once he made his decision, he kicked off the bottom of the riverbank and shot it fast. Waving his arms wildly, he splashed about to create a protective cover of water as he broke the surface. When he opened his eyes, he was amazed at what he saw. The woods on either side were dark. The forest fire was a good mile behind them. What had been making the water glow and burning the bottom of the boat was a large clump of burning branches that had accumulated along the upturned bottom of the boat. He moved to the burning branches and removed his pack. Then, using the waterlogged pack, he struck the branches with it and knocked them off into the water. It took him a minute or so before the last branch had been removed. Bart ducked back down under the water and came up inside the boat. "We're past the fire," he told them. Then he explained about the branches and how they were now safely past the fire. Okay, hang on a second. Ryan chuckled. "All this time we thought we were still in the fire and instead have been fooled by a bunch of burning branches." The others broke into laughter at that. Not so much of what he said, but due to the relief that each felt at having survived such a deadly journey. "Now, let's move to the bank and flip the boat upright again," Bart said. He and the others left the warm, still air inside the overturned boat and were soon once again in the cool, smoke-filled air of the forest. When Ryan ducked under the water with the goblin youth, it woke completely. Thrashing about, it almost broke free of Ryan's grasp, but he managed to keep hold of it until they broke the surface on the other side of the boat. "Hold him still," Kevik said as he moved behind Ryan and opened his pack. He had seen the burns on the goblin youth's face and wanted to help. While Ryan held onto the youth, Kevik removed the last of the healing potions and returned to Ryan's side. The goblin's eyes were opened wide in fear as he saw Kevik move the bottle toward him. The goblin youth thrashed about intensely as he fought to free himself of Ryan's grip. "Hold him steady," Kevik said. Bart realized what he was trying to do and moved to help Ryan in holding the youth still. Chad stayed where he was and kept hold of the boat to prevent the current from taking it away. With Bart's help, the youth was soon held tightly. Kevik moved the mouth of the bottle to its lips. "Just something to help with your burns," he said soothingly to the goblin. When the goblin wasn't being cooperative in opening its mouth, Kevik said to Bart, "See if you can get his lips open." Bart moved a hand to the goblin's mouth and spread his lips apart. He tilted the goblin's head back as Kevik poured a small portion of the potion onto the goblin's teeth. It may not be perfect, but at least some of it would get into its system. After that, he moved the bottle to the burn covering the right half of the youth's face. The goblin's eyes widened as the bottle came closer. And then before the first drop left the bottle, the youth relaxed in Ryan's grip. Believing the youth was no longer going to struggle, Ryan relaxed his grip as well. As soon as the first drop fell onto the burned area of its face, it lashed out with a frantic struggle to free itself. Caught unawares, Ryan couldn't hold him. "Get him!" yelled Bart as the youth twisted out of his grip. Then it was free and made a dash for the trees. Before anyone could catch it, it was gone. They stood there but a moment before Chad, who still stood next to the boat, said, "Let's get out of here before he brings others." That broke the spell of the moment, and the other three rushed to help him in riding the boat in the water. Once it was again floating right side up, they tossed their backs into the bottom and climbed on board. Bart and Ryan quickly used the oars to move down the river. Ryan glanced back at the trees where the goblin lad had disappeared until they had moved too far away to see it. He couldn't help but be amazed by the fact that he had actually touched and held an actual goblin. Surprisingly, he hoped it would be okay. Refocusing his attention on his paddling, he worked with Bart to send them quickly down the river. Behind them, the glow from the fire was still quite visible, and they were more than happy to leave it behind. In no time at all, they came to where the river flowed into the larger lake. "The marketplace shouldn't be too much farther," commented Ryan. "We should be able to make it before dawn," Chad agreed. Once out onto the lake, they used the silhouettes of the mountains as a guide and paddled for them. It took them an hour to cross before the shore where they needed to disembark came into view. Off to the right, the lights from the goblin village they had seen the first time they passed this way were visible. From this distance, it was hard to tell, but it did look like there was movement among the buildings. At least the area where they were about to land looked quiet and deserted. The dirt and rocks of the shoreline ground beneath the boat's bottom as it ran ashore. When they were out of the boat, Ryan asked if they should hide it. "No," replied Chad. "It's a goblin boat in goblin territory. Who's going to care?" Ryan grinned. "Guess you have a point there." He tossed the oar into the bottom of the boat and then grabbed his pack. Once they were ready, they left the boat behind and entered the trees. Somewhere at the base of the mountains ahead lay the marketplace and the pass leading home. And that ends chapter 29, or chapter 28. 29 is tomorrow. And then that ends Shepherd's Quest. I'll do some final little bits to it, and then I'll get that uploaded. All the changes I made over the last almost month in doing this. Still having fun doing it. Now a little future spoiler here about the next series if I ever write it. The Goblin Lad. I always planned that somehow, some way, that Goblin Lad would come back and be part of the story. I haven't quite figured out how yet. That's why I had the burn on his face. That way, like a year later or something, or whenever he shows up, they might recognize him as the one they had in the boat. I just thought, and but would he be friend? Would he be a foe? Would he have understood they were trying to help him? Would he have thought that they were trying to capture and torture him? I haven't quite decided that yet, but I thought that would be interesting to tie that in. So chapter 29, I don't think it's a long chapter, so tomorrow might be short, but it's the end, coming to the end of the second book that I've read chapter by chapter. Yep, rather enjoy it. And then we start in on Adventures Guild, which I'm really looking forward to. That one there, just this total fun story. Well, y'all take care, and I hope to see you tomorrow.